want to talk about religious engineering and how there's a stranglehold on people in the West and actually in a lot of places in the world, not just the West, but that stranglehold is there because we have given into being dumbed down. We've given into degeneracy. We've given into being idiots and being weak. That has allowed people to trample on us. Jesus says, if the salt loses its savor, it's worth nothing but to be tossed out and trampled upon. And that's happened to a lot of us in the West, especially because we've lost our way. The historian Oswald Spengler predicted that Western man would create the most amazing technology, and then the third world would come in and take that technology and oppress him and suppress him with it. And that's unfortunately where it looks like things are going. We wrote an episode of the Sam Hyde Show called Dear Elon, and then we wrote Dear Vivek. And those went viral. They got millions and millions of views. One of them got, I think, 25 million impressions or views or whatever on X. And it was really about the H-1B visa controversy, which has resurfaced today. And I'm not going to talk about that mainly because I think this is another major area of criticism of Trump. What he said about this is just totally not true. The idea that humans are really just replaceable economic units, even something that J.D. Vance has admitted is a valid criticism of this sort of classical liberal ethos that we still live in. Classical liberalism has certain weak points. And when you put the market forces at the front of society, it's really a materialist move because there's other areas and other elements that society needs to function, to be healthy, to be successful. Things like having a religious worldview, a paradigm. So, for example, we have the Dark Enlightenment guys that are kind of gaining some popularity and some traction, and people from the neo-reaction circles for many, many years have also been a fan of what I talk about. And the reason for that is that people like Curtis Yarvin or Nick Land, they realize a lot of the problems in the Western ethos. Now, the Enlightenment gave us a lot of good things, but it also gave us some problems. The idea that you could universalize all of Western man's experience and sort of import that or export that everywhere is not true. You're not going to get all the societies in the world to adopt constitutional government, to adopt voting, and to these ideas of fair trade, all this kind of stuff. It just doesn't work. Not every society is made even to be the same. And so the universalized ideas, the Enlightenment, all came about prior to things like the discovery of genetics and DNA. Those discoveries had an important role in refuting even some of the Darwinian ideas that you could sort of tailor everything by the environment, right? There's already quite a bit of programming that's in us already by nature. And so nurture isn't the total determiner. There's a balance, a symbiotic relationship between nature and nurture, but two sides of this dialectic were both wrong, and there's a symbiotic synthesis that occurs between these domains. So we lived in this era that the World War II consensus is now beginning to break. People are going crazy and now thinking, oh, well, I guess if World War II wasn't everything that we were taught it was, then I guess now Hitler's a good guy or Hitler's a hero or something like that. So humans swing to the opposite extremes in every case. And it's very difficult to get a nuanced, balanced middle position. But that's what we have to strive for. So what is it I'm getting at with all this? What am I yapping about? I'm saying that the ethos that we're in, which is becoming postmodern, which is becoming nihilistic, which is becoming destructive, is not accidental. It's something that oftentimes happens in civilizations. Spengler wrote about the fact that eventually societies decay because they have a lifespan. And when they begin to live out that lifespan, they, after that flourishing, begin to have certain patterns that they always display when they start to go bankrupt or when they start to disintegrate. Wellington House and Tavistock actually studied Spengler's writings to weaponize it. Spengler wasn't writing Decline of the West or his other writings to try to tell people how to destroy the West. He felt like it was kind of inevitable as a historian. And then you had people in British intelligence and certain socialists and, the people of the Fabian socialist ilk, John Ruskin, these kinds of characters. Their mindset was that you could create a world federalist socialist society based on the total and technocratic control of man. Back at that time, they thought it would be the British Empire. They thought they could retool and re-engineer the British Empire to be supreme. And even the Rothschilds were part of that. Cecil Rhodes was part of that. And they thought also that they could control Islam, that they could take control of Mecca, they could take control of other holy sites, try to run the Middle East. British Empire, of course, helped create, set the stage for the creation of the nation state of Israel, which we've talked about many times. And they also thought that in order to defeat the Ottomans, one of their rivals, they could make an alliance with radical Muslims or Sunni Islam or Wahhabists. And that is where we get this long-time alliance between the West and even Israel and some forms of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, etc. That continues to this day as we see Giuliani, after the fall of Assad, being welcomed to New York, being lauded and praised. I guess I'm shooting basketball with people the other day. It's like ISIS is playing basketball with Jewish guys or something on Twitter. Like it doesn't make any sense, but it actually does make sense, because if you read Victor Ostrovsky's book, By Way of Deception, and his other book, The Other Side of Deception, in both of those texts, he'll talk about, of course, Mossad, of course, Israel has propped up radical Muslims that would be a destabilizing force in Syria and Lebanon, in Egypt, and against the PLO. So this is old news, long-time strategy. And for those that would critique Alex or even myself, I mean, Alex talked about and had Victor Ostrovsky on his show 15 years ago. I was listening at the time when he had him on. They were talking about the Israel sinking one of the flotillas at the time. So this is old news. A lot of this is old news, but people are just now learning these things. And then they think that, you never talked about this because I don't hear you talking about it every day. Well, I got my website, my livelihood deleted in 2018 when I was talking about a lot of this stuff. So it's not true, but whatever. What about Islam? Well, we just saw a Muslim socialist become or get elected as the mayor of New York. And this is everything that I've been talking about in all these fourth hours for years now about Fabian socialism, the alliance with Islam. It's the Fabian socialists in the UK that 100 years ago plus said, we will Islamicize England. And then that will be the pattern for the Islamicization of Europe. And although there aren't as many Muslims in the US, that is still part of the strategy. That's why the same Fabian socialists run Canada, Australia, Keir Starmer in the UK, and now we're getting these socialists in New York. There will be socialists in California. And so the walls are closing in. And that is not antithetical to Zionism. Now, in the long term, you could say probably a lot of the socialist-minded people don't care about Israel or don't care about the nation state of Israel. But in the meantime, there's no problem with that alliance. I'm sure that Netanyahu, I'm sure that people in Israel, they don't care about Hamas or Palestinians being deported to America or being deported to Jordan or wherever. I'm sure they don't care. And as many people have noted, there are many rabbis who have called Islam the broom of Judaism or the broom of Israel. And so they don't have a problem with that. In fact, Count Kudnov-Kalergi says that Islam will help destroy Europe, and then we'll have one Mongoloid race. That's what he wrote in his book, Practical Idealism. It's not racist or mean to talk about what he said would be the plan. And in Carol Quigley's Anglo-American Establishment, he says that Lionel Curtis's plan and Practical Idealism from Kalergi, those plans were both presented to the British establishment, and they agreed that both plans had excellent techniques and strategies for the world order. So religion is a key tool of this system. And Islam is one of the best tools. Judaism, you could say, is a very insular, in-group preference, non-proselytizing religion. So they're not so much interested in going out and converting people. But Islam, which is largely based on copy-paste, mixed-up Bible stories, Gnostic texts, and the Talmud, is a very useful tool. It's not monolithic in the sense that all Muslims believe the same thing, but one of the key books that I read many years ago that I lectured through for a long time is actually from a Royal Society researcher. It's called Secret Affairs, Britain's Collusion with Radical Islam by Mark Curtis. And so when we read a book like this, we're actually reading a very high level kind of, Brzezinski, Kissinger type of text. This is not conspiracy theorizing. When I cite a book, this doesn't mean that I'm agreeing with everything that the author says. It's odd that I have to say this kind of stuff, but people are just so dumbed down and so low IQ. When you start talking about a book, I mentioned Carroll Quigley. Oh, you think Carroll Quigley is telling the truth? You think he's a good guy? Never said that. I'm citing it as a text that tells us what our rulers believe. Just like if I cite Changing Images of Man and we do a whole 4th hour with Alex and it gets, 1 or 2 million views on X, and people start losing their minds and going crazy because I talked about Hitler getting Bank of England funding and getting industrialist funding. It's like people are just so triggered by these dialectics. But I want to talk about how the elite view these things. What do they write about in their books? We want to understand their perspective. I know that's hard for some people to do, to get out of your little box and think in terms of how other people view things. But Aristotle said it's the mark of an intelligent man to understand an argument without accepting it. And that's what we're trying to do here when we look at these high-level texts and what the elite themselves say. So what does the Royal Society, the RIIA, Royal Institute for International Affairs, say about Islam? Well, this book is written from that perspective. Of course, Britain has colluded with radical Islam as an example for many years. Why would they do that? It doesn't seem to make sense. Why would they support the system or a system that seems to undermine traditional UK, English, quasi-Christian values? Well, he says at the beginning of the book that there's 5 key reasons why Islam was used by the British Empire. During the Cold War, it was a powerful bastion against the Soviets, so they could utilize it, much like Brzezinski talked about the Mujahideen being a kind of anti-red, anti-communist muscle. The conservative, quote, muscle, they called it. So they could also use it for destabilization. So it's anti-communist, it's conservative muscle, and it has a very powerful tool within it because it's almost like a death cult, right? You can really engineer people very well to be suicide bombers, whatever. And so it's a destabilizing force, especially the Taliban version or the ISIS versions of it, right? It's a proxy military force. You can utilize this force in some other country to fight for you. And it also carries within it political tools. Why? Why was there so much of this utilizing of Islam? Why would the UK care so much about this? Well, from the vantage point of empire, it's all about controlling oil and resources. So obtaining and controlling oil and resources is exactly why they would do it. And even controlling the religious sites ultimately has to do with that. So again, the book is excellent. It's Secret Affairs. I've lectured through this text as well as many other texts just like it. And if you don't follow me on YouTube, please do so. I mean, we cover everything from movies to big geopolitical texts. We do comedic stuff. So we're talking about religious engineering, the collapse of Western narratives, the rise of accelerationism, technocracy, transhumanism, the push of Islam into the West, all of these forces that are intended ultimately to collapse and recreate the West into the image of something akin to a dystopian nightmare. We were talking about Islam being pushed in the West on purpose because it's a tool of the elites that would like to see an absolute demographic change in all the West, not just Europe, but also the United States. And they're very open about that. Replacement migration is real. There were bankers, Peter Sutherland, years ago talking publicly in the European news about how to do this, how to engineer this, how to structure this, echoing the 100 years earlier plan from Count Coudenhove-Kalergi in his book, Practical Idealism, which you can all look up and see is very real. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a model of immigration warfare, or weapons of mass migration, to quote the Kelly Greenhill military text. So we're talking about these deals and these decisions that were made by the British Empire to structure a socialist possibility of the future. And there were some debates amongst the elites as to how to go about this and how exactly they wanted to structure it. Some of them favored something more akin to a conservative right-wing approach. Some of them, even amongst the British elites, favored Hitler and Nazism. And some of them actually favored more of a socialist communist style. So you've got factions and disagreements amongst the Council on Foreign Relations back in the Cold War. There were debates and disagreements. Some of them wanted a rapprochement with the Soviet Union. They wanted the third way, where you could synthesize capitalism and communism. Some of them wanted, amongst, I think, the Dullists, they seemed to even like Hitler and his ideas. So there were people in America that supported fascism, Operation Paperclip, etc. There were people in the U.S. that supported Fabian socialism. You had Colonel Edwin Mandel House and President Wilson basically being socialist. You had, the vice president at that time was also socialist, FDR socialist. So America has had these same phases and experiments with socialism. And even though socialism always collapses, a lot of the Gen Z and younger millennials are convinced that capitalism has failed. And so now they want to experiment with socialism. And being dumbed down, being uneducated, they don't know that socialism is actually a tool of the money elite. They think that they're actually going to get a free lunch. They think that they're going to get a universal basic income. They think that technocracy is actually about fairness and actually about everybody getting a slice of the pie. And it's not. It's about enslavement. Ultimately, it is a satanic anti-human philosophy. If you remember in 1984, that's really the point that Orwell is making in that novel, is that Ingsoc is English Fabian socialism. It's also modeled on Stalinism, the two together, and it's a boot stamping on the face of man for all eternity. In Bill Joy's famous essay that Alex Jones always quotes, "The Future, Why the Future Doesn't Need Us," if you read the full essay, it's all about how the technocrats have already decided that it's a post-human future. That's what we're up against. That's where we're going. And so he says, I've had a crisis of conscience, you could say. I'm looking for some kind of an ethic. We need some kind of future ethic that will promote virtue. And he sort of speculates that maybe Buddhism or something like that. So, and I think he even makes reference to things like tragedy and hope. So it's an odd essay. It references a lot of things that you wouldn't expect, a lot of things that you hear me talk about or Alex talk about for many, many years. But he says that the danger is that the future is anti-human. The future is to replace man with some kind of silicon-based life form or something post-human. And with a lot of the philosophers that we've seen being discussed lately, the Curtis Yarvins, the Nick Lands, their idea is, well, we're going to have a sort of technocratic monarchy, perhaps a based and trad CEO city-state that supplants the older models of the collapsing Enlightenment narratives. While I agree with the Dark Enlightenment's critique, I don't know that the answer is going to be something like a Nietzschean John Galt CEO that rules a city-state or something like that. I mean, it just seems very unlikely that you can actually construct a society or a civilization that doesn't have some kind of cohesive narrative or worldview. Something that teaches virtue, something that allows families to flourish, something that's pro-human. I mean, even though you might have positive critiques from Yarvin or Nick Land or any of these sort of Nietzschean figures or Nietzschean-minded ideologues, if at the end of the day, nothing is being offered to the society or the civilization beyond tech or beyond arbitrary hierarchy, there's really nothing that actually produces the flourishing. There's no telos, there's no purpose for life. It's, again, just another version of a technocratic model, but maybe not a leftist version or something. So, but for this is very short-sighted, what I'm trying to say. It's very reductionistic, right? And this is common amongst the Silicon Valley technocratic elite types, and Yarvin and Land are very influential on those individuals. Even Peter Thiel talks now about Christianity, Antichrist, and all this, but it's a lot of the Christian verbiage sort of repackaged and retooled to actually mean based technocracy, supposedly. So, but what is that? Is that really realistic? Well, what happens with a lot of nerdy guys and tech-minded guys and Lord of the Rings fans is that they live in their mind. They're kind of like communists, except that communists think that their ideals can be forced into reality. Or the right-wing technocrat thinks that his fantasy LARP of Lord of the Rings and living in some sort of a feudal city-state like John Galt, like, it's not reality, because you've got to have something more than the promise of transhumanism or something like that, because humans need worship. They need cycles of life. They need patterns that they go through. So, for example, in the Orthodox Church, we have the liturgical year, the liturgical cycle. We have Christmas, we have Easter, we have Pentecost. We have these very important cycles that reflect not some distant, amorphous, ambiguous future, but also the past. And so you can't have meaning without having grounded, transcendent patterns from the past. One of the strengths of the Christian narrative, even if you disagree with it, is that it talks about where man's coming from, what man's mistakes are, what man's virtues and vices are, and where he's going. So it gives meaning to history. Systems that are nihilistic and technocratic, even if they're right-wing and based, don't give man those things. They cannot of their nature. All they could say is something kind of like communism of, we're looking towards an eschatological end times goal of the withering away of the state, right? That's the communist Marxist promise. Free stuff, do what you want all day long. Maybe eventually the state withers away. And if you go back to older Marxists, classical Marxists, they actually, some of them wrote that technology would be the means by which the state would wither away and man would be able to live freely doing whatever he wants. Many people don't know that classical Marxism is actually libertarian. Yes, you heard me right. I know that many libertarians will lose their mind when I say that, but that's actually true. Marx believed in the withering away of the state. That's the libertarian goal. Marx disagreed on the means to get there and what you do along the way. So certainly he's not principled in any sort of libertarian sense, but he did believe that eventually there would be the achieving of a stateless world and perhaps some kind of utopia. He didn't think this was necessary or determined, but possible. So likewise, the libertarian believes that the best possibility for man is, I don't know, a floating Bitcoin island fortress or something. I don't know exactly what it is, but Galt's Gulch maybe. So both of these are very idealistic. Both of these are very fantasy-based, you could say. And certainly we have to have some realm of imagination and fantasy that allows us to consider the possibilities of what we want to shoot for. But societies, as even Plato understood, can't hold together and can't cohere if there's not at least some common narrative. Plato called it the noble lie, which is a religious deception that you use to kind of hold the society together. The elites, people at the top, the oligarchs, the philosopher kings, they know that it's not really true, but it's very useful to achieve societal cohesion. And the problem is that a lot of these narratives tend to break down, right? The Enlightenment narrative is breaking down. Classical liberalism is breaking down. Monopolistic capitalism is breaking down. Americanism is breaking down. So what do we replace it with? Well, a lot of philosophers, a lot of technocrats are thinking, we will give you the answer. We will give you this technocratic, supposed quasi-utopian option or whatever. It won't be leftist, it'll be bathed in right-wing technocracy, right? But none of these solutions are actually grounded in anything historical. That's the problem, is that These technocrats and these dorks are so abstract and fantasy oriented and sci-fi oriented in their thinking, they act like you can just ignore history and man's origins. Man is just, again, another kind of movable, replaceable economic unit, and you can just exchange him and interchange him with any other economic unit or product. But that's not true, because man has racial, historical, genetic memories. He has a bloodline. He has a lineage. You know, when you read the Bible talks quite a bit about bloodlines of father of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, son of so-and-so. In the Gospels, it's very important that, for example, Jesus be shown to be the descendant of Abraham and the descendant of Adam, because otherwise he doesn't fulfill these promised prophecies of a biological descendant. Now, I'm not saying that everything hinges on biology or that biological determinism or blood and soil or the be-all, end-all, but I'm saying that those things do matter. They can matter. And what most of us don't do is place things in hierarchies of importance. So for many people, especially in America, outside of the idol of football, the idol of politics is their number 2 idol. Americans believe so intently in the power of politics that it is almost the real religion of Americanism. Americanism is more important than actual church history. It's more important than Jesus. It's more important than all of these things. And that's one of the problems in America, is the idea that our solutions will come either through the market, GDP, or through political action. Now, am I saying that politics doesn't matter, that economics doesn't matter? No, but for many, many people, that is their idol, that is their focus. But you cannot build a civilization. Take, for example, the Christianizing of the Roman Empire. The longest living, most successful civilization in the West was Byzantium. The Byzantine Empire had a flourishing Byzant currency based on gold that lasted for centuries. Eventually, they fell prey to everybody else's temptation, which was to practice money clipping and to debase their currency. Now, we have the possibility in our society of turning to something even better than gold, something like Bitcoin. And Trump kind of sees that a little bit. He changed his mind, and that was a great thing. But then now they've switched, maybe it needs to be this CBDC to prop up the dollar and this and that. But that's not the focused laser eyes of the original Bitcoin insight that Trump seemed to kind of be on board with. I'm just using it as an example, because civilizations like Byzantium that flourish, they didn't flourish because of some future-only oriented enterprise or some idealistic promise or something like that. They flourished because Orthodox Christianity helped them flourish. Orthodox churches are tripling. They're growing like crazy. In fact, we just had one of the metropolitans, I think, of the Antiochians, just give an entire lecture on how surprising it is to see this explosion of Orthodox Christianity in America. Now, that is a kind of faith and is a kind of belief system that has tried and true built actual empires in the past. I'm not saying that the goal, first and foremost, of Orthodox Christianity is to build an empire. We're not primarily temporally oriented. But the most important thing here is a hierarchy of importance, putting things in their proper order. And that's something that we don't hear about in modern discourse. Everything is either ors. You're either into Jesus or you're into politics. You're either into this or you're into that. Well, why can't we have things in hierarchies of importance? Remember when J.D. Vance said something that was pretty common sense and obvious, right? The principle of subsidiarity. I care the most about those closest to me in terms of proximity. You could think about it in concentric circles. Do I care about what's happening in Africa, the Middle East, China? Sure, but that's not something that I can immediately affect. My immediate circles, my local county, city, etc., that's much more relevant and local. And so my love and attention and focus should first and foremost be on those people. Oh, well, I guess you hate all the people in China and you hate the people in Palestine. No, it's a degree of importance. It's a hierarchy of first and foremost, right? But everything is always cast in terms of these false either ors. Well, either you support what's happening in the Middle East and you talk about it every day, or you hate them. Well, what if I have priorities above that? What if Orthodox Christianity is the priority above the politics? Does that mean I don't care about politics? I hate politics. I hate people involved. No, it's just silly. It's just retarded. It's just childish. And the discourse, the trolling, all this stuff that has emerged, by the way, by design. And if you remember, the NATO cognitive warfare documents talked about weaponizing trolling, that the emotional discourse that occurs on the internet actually causes people to become hypersensitive, reactionary, and put them into a state of going overboard. I'm not saying you can't post memes and be ridiculous. I do that all the time, but the discourse is becoming more and more toxic, more and more radical, more and more compartmentalized in the sense of like people are choosing their sides. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing because we're forced to this situation. We are probably going to see a kind of disintegration of the West and a kind of returning to like. People are going to decide that, okay, I'm not welcome in these, leftist cities. Maybe I need to stick to people who have the ideas and the ideology that I have. So people are, I think, going to start building communities around like-minded people. We're going to see people creating Christian villages, Christian societies, Christian communities. This is already beginning where people are starting to, for example, create Orthodox Christian homesteads and villages with that kind of a mindset. And I'm sure other groups will do likewise. So this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's unfortunate, I guess, that we have to go into this kind of a situation. But the left, the establishment, they are forcing this. They are forcing people into these enclaves, and they're intentionally causing and creating this kind of radicalization. And it is what it is. It's not going to be stopped. But I would say it's very important not to fall for entrapment, not to fall for ridiculous idealistic schemes of, let's go take Washington and we're going to destroy the government. We're going to set up a militia of a Christian patriot government. This kind of stuff could very easily turn into a honeypot kind of operation. Before Charlottesville, I was telling the right-wing people to be careful. I wouldn't be directly involved in that. And lo and behold, that's what happened. I'm not saying it's wrong to protest. I'm just saying that these kinds of events are very easily coerced and seduced into being honey trap operations. And what do we know? Well, now J6 turns out, allegedly, we have this identified Capitol Police woman who's now been recruited allegedly into the CIA, they say. Again, backing up the countless federal operatives that were in the crowd. It's just everything constantly more and more looks like what we always thought, that this was a kind of a planned operation. I'm not blaming people that went. I'm not saying that you're bad if you went and protested. I'm saying that you have to understand that the system is not as stupid as they often portray themselves. They are very cunning, and they will utilize every trick in the book to try to destroy and take down the awakening and the emerging reaction against this insane socialist leftist cult that has taken over the West, that has a stranglehold on the West. And it's not just Jews and Zionism, although they do play a key role in this power structure. They wouldn't be able to do that if they didn't have all the support from very powerful, very numerous numbers of leftists and individuals in the West. So it's a combined effort of people who have horrible, evil worldviews working together, cross purposes, to bring down America, to bring down Western civilization, and to implement this globo-homo technocracy that they are absolutely hell-bent on bringing in. And that's exactly what Changing Images of Man is all about. This was the kind of textbook that, people at the Kissinger level, people at the Silicon Valley elite level, when they were going to Stanford, when they were taking their grad classes and studying international relations and studying world systems and world order, They were doing their systems analysis studies and PhDs. This is the textbook that they use. There's a reason why this is $1,000 or $2,000 on Amazon and out of print. It's because it's not for everybody. This was not a textbook meant for you. You know, if you're in college or in grad school, you know, your textbooks, even when they're new, they're like $200, $300, $400. It's crazy, right? This textbook in 1982 was probably $100, right? It wasn't meant for a mass audience. And mass audiences don't read these kinds of books anyway, right? Just like Tragedy and Hope. People say, why would they put it in a book? Well, that was not a book in the 1960s and 70s written for a mass audience. They could rest assured the masses are not going to read this book. So we have a unique situation where even though the masses don't read anymore, they are and can pick up on true information and what's really going on through the internet. And unfortunately, I think they're trying to destroy the internet. I think the internet is going to be flooded with just slop, AI slop everywhere. Everything's already been, you know, websites have been sort of de-emphasized and deflected through, you know, Google search and all that, to where now everybody's forced onto the major social media platforms, all of which is controlled through the algorithm. I was looking at my Instagram the other day and I noticed that I was never notified, or if it was in some random notification that I never saw, that, well, actually my account was shadow banned for the last 3 years because I posted 3 years ago about Jeffrey Dahmer having a satanic altar that he built, which is true. It's admitted. But that violated the community guidelines. And the only reason I'm saying this is just that I didn't even know. So my growth was stunted for 3 years because there was this hidden thing 5 pages deep into Instagram of posting something that isn't even a community guideline strike. So the algorithms are what control perception now. That's why it's absolutely essential to go to X, to follow Alex, go to X, follow Harrison, go to X, follow me, go to my YouTube channel, follow it, turn on the notifications, because I lecture on this stuff and I've lectured on this stuff for 15 years now. And props to Alex for being such a trooper, such a pioneer in terms of waking so many people up. He's done a great service to humanity. We should thank God every day for Alex Jones, and pray for Alex Jones, and pray for this movement and for this awakening, that it doesn't get hijacked, that people don't act like complete retards and get honeytrapped into the next stupid idea, because that's what the system has next. I guarantee you, like Alex says, they have to get some kind of big racially motivated thing, whatever that is, fake flag event, because they divide and conquer, right? Divide and conquer the Middle East with tribal religious ideas. Divide and conquer the Ukraine with Orthodox Christian ideas versus schismatic ideas. Divide and conquer America through what? What's America's weak point? Racial division and racial ideas going back to the Civil War. So watch out for America's color revolution, which will be race-based.